Well, good morning. My name is Ray LaHood, Secretary of Transportation, and we just had over an hour meeting here with Secretary Geithner and myself reviewing a report that was done on infrastructure in America, on a path forward for infrastructure, on funding for infrastructure. We were obviously joined by the President, and the President listened to the mayors and governors and our friends from labor and others who gathered with us today. This continues our message that the President announced in Milwaukee on Labor Day, that infrastructure does provide jobs, that we're going to be working with Congress after the election on a 6-year bill with an opportunity to begin with a $50 billion upfront opportunity. And the report that was released today, co-chaired by Secretary Mineta and Secretary Skinner, substantiates the idea that infrastructure does put people to work. These opportunities can create thousands of jobs across America, and to really emphasize the President's leadership and his message in Milwaukee on Labor Day, announcing the $50 billion upfront opportunity, and then to work with Congress on a 6-year bill. I'm going to ask Secretary Mineta and Secretary Skinner to talk for a moment or two about their report, and then we'll be happy to answer questions that you may have of any of the governors or mayors that are gathered here. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Sam.
Go.
No, you go ahead.
Right.
You're senior.
Thanks. There's, under the Miller Center of Public Affairs at the University of Virginia, they pulled together some 80 experts, and Sam Skinner and I had the privilege of co-chairing that conference. And they came up with 10 specific recommendations. I don't want to go through all of them, but really what they are, because there's been a litany of analysis about transportation issues and how to deal with them. And the 10 recommendations were really to try to deal with a compilation of what has to be done. So we feel very strongly that under the leadership of this President, who has been really the infrastructure president, that President Obama, as well as the leadership of Secretary of Treasury Geithner, Secretary of Transportation LaHood, that they will be able to put together a plan for the execution and the implementation of the various facets that have to be put together in terms of support for the $50 billion infrastructure needs. So the important point is really how to execute the program and implement what has to be done. And we feel the recommendations fall very much in line with the report from the Secretary of Treasury today.
Well, 1990, we sat here in 1992 and signed a bill, Republicans and Democrats working together on building infrastructure, rebuilding infrastructure with the help of then Congressman Mineta. And I think today we have that opportunity again. This President is committed to infrastructure investment. He's committed to a long-term approach. He's committed to looking at various options for funding as well as efficiency and technology. And Secretary LaHood and Secretary Geithner have been tasked to fully support that effort. The Miller Center report, which the Miller Center is a nonpartisan center in Virginia that prepared this report with our support and help. And I think that'll be a basis for it going forward along with Secretary Geithner's report. So I think we have a real opportunity here to do something that's badly needed in this nation, and that's to invest real money, real dollars in real infrastructure that's going to get people back to work, going to get people to work, home from work, and especially those people that don't have automobiles and some of the expensive methods of transportation that others do, to get them transportation they need to get back to their jobs. Thank you.
Let me just ask Governor Rendell and Mayor Zaragoza just for a minute or two, because they've been so involved in transportation during their time as mayor of L.A. and governor of Pennsylvania and the former governor of Philadelphia. So just say a word or two, and
Sure.
then we'll take questions.
Well, we think the president's vision is right on target. Number one, it's a long-term vision. This country cannot stop investing, and particularly cannot stop investing in its infrastructure. So the 6-year plan is right on target. But upfronting $50 billion from that plan works. It's the single best job creator we can do in this country. It puts people to work at the construction sites, on the bridges, on the roads, highways, but it also puts people back to work in factories, steel factories, asphalt factories, concrete factories, aggregate factories. In Pennsylvania, in the first year of stimulus, orders went up to steel factories by 40%, concrete factories by 43%, and asphalt factories by 50%. It works. It creates well-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. It's just what the economy needs. And we're hoping that it'll get a bipartisan reception once this election is over, because Republicans care about infrastructure. Jim Inhofe said at a time I testified before his committee that it's the second most important thing the government could spend money on behind military. Jim Inhofe and I authored a op-ed piece for Politico. This is an issue that I think cuts across partisan lines. We need to get this done.
Go ahead, Mayor.
I dare say there are few issues as nonpartisan or bipartisan as the issue of transportation and infrastructure. The fact is that America is not keeping up. The fact is that in the world today, America is doing a third of what Western Europe is doing. We're not even in the league with China. And we've got to be competitive. We've got to get people back to work, but also create the infrastructure that will build a strong economy. And no one knows that better than the cities that are represented here and cities across the country. 90% of the GDP that's created in the United States of America is created in metropolitan areas. And in the city of Los Angeles, we've taxed ourselves $0.015, $120 billion over the next 30 years to invest in infrastructure. And one of the recommendations from well within reach is that we ought to leverage what public-private partnerships and leverage what cities and counties are doing, particularly during a time of historic deficits and debt. So I want to thank the two secretaries and the 5 secretaries that were here with us, both Democrat and Republican, who agree that it's time for America to invest in its infrastructure and its people again.
Questions?
Mr. Secretary LaHood, infrastructure has become a very partisan issue in a sense because of the stimulus. If you watch any political ad now, you see that stimulus is almost a 4-letter word in terms of those who voted for it and against it and that kind of thing. How do you keep this sort of thing from becoming partisan once again?
Well, in the past, if you look at the tradition of Congress, whether under any administration, I served on the Transportation Committee for 6 years as a member of the House. These transportation bills have always been bipartisan. The last bill passed with over 300 votes in the House, over 80 votes in the Senate. The bill before that passed with over 300 votes in the House and over 80 votes in the Senate. The tradition of Congress has been to work in a bipartisan way. There are no Democratic or Republican bridges or roads. There simply are not. And the tradition of Congress has been to work in a bipartisan way. About 2 weeks ago, I had a 2-hour meeting with Chairman Oberstar about the President's speech in Milwaukee and what he said, and about Chairman Oberstar's bill. And he and I agreed almost 100% on a path forward for principles for a new bill and jump-starting it with a $50 billion upfront cost after the election. And the striking thing for me was that Chairman Oberstar and others in that room said, we believe there will be Republican support for this. So if you look at the tradition of the House and look at the tradition of the Senate on transportation bills, you will find, if you look at the votes, which are the most important thing we can look at, they've been done in a bipartisan way. I believe they will be again.
Mr. LaHood, you say this is one of the greatest things you can do to create jobs. Why didn't you do this a year ago, sir, as opposed to, say, 3 weeks before Election Day?
Well, look, you all know the answer to that. The president inherited a mess when he came here. He tried to address that mess, the economic mess. There were obviously other priorities for the administration. I don't think anybody doubts in this town or anywhere in America the president is willing to take on big things and get them accomplished and persuade Congress to pass them and sign them into law. And now it happens that transportation and infrastructure has moved up, I believe, to the top of the list.
Secretary LaHood, the House is waiting for the Senate to introduce the transportation bill. The Senate can't decide on how to pay for it. What's your input on how they should come up with the money?
We will, the President made it very clear at this meeting today. He made it very clear in Milwaukee. He's made it very clear whenever he's talked about this. This will be paid for. This will not be put on the debt. We will find a path forward to pay for. And we will be looking at a lot of recommendations, and we will be consulting with Chairman Oberstar, Chairman Boxer, and the others in the Senate who will be working on this, and the leadership. There will be a pay for this. Stay tuned. We'll let you know.
Mr. LaHood, would you say that what's off the table is the closing of the oil and gas tax breaks that the president put up?
Look, I'm not going to get into the recommendations. We're talking to Congress about a pay for. We know it has to be paid for, and I'm not going to stand here and list all the options. There are a lot of things being discussed, and I think when we, as we work with Congress, we'll be making the announcements about it.
Think about the idea that's in the Mineta Skinner report, among other sources, for the long term to have a, knowing you have to move away from the gas tax to get a vehicle miles traveled device in people's cars.
Now, you all know what kind of trouble I got in for talking about that. Any other questions?
It's a great idea, by the way.
Bill Press. Bill Press.
Rendell said we cannot stop investing. So what do you think of the governor of New Jersey's decision to cancel the New Jersey-New York tunnel?
Look, we are going to work with the governor over the next 2 weeks. I was with the governor on Friday. We had a very good meeting, and I believe over the next 2 weeks he will listen to a number of options that we will present. His team will look at them. Our team will look at them, and so stay tuned. In a couple.
Mistake to cancel construction?
Any other questions?
Over here. How many
over
jobs?
there. Yeah, go ahead.
How many jobs are we talking about, and when and where?
Well,
we're spending 5 times already $15 billion.
The $48 billion that came to the Department of Transportation under the stimulus bill, there are 14,000 projects going on in America right now. You drive down any street in America, any highway in America, and what you will see are orange cones and orange barrels and thousands of people working. The one thing that Americans know is that our stimulus has worked because they see their friends and neighbors working. They see their friends and neighbors working on roads and bridges, in transit systems, and our money has worked. We put out $8 billion for high-speed rail, and there's all kinds of activity going on in America. We put out $28 billion for roads and bridges. There's thousands of people working, 14,000 projects today. The idea that our stimulus didn't work is nonsense. Ask any of these mayors or governors who get complaints from their people all the time about the fact that, roads are being fixed up and people are, being delayed. It has worked.
We took a snapshot on June 30th in Pennsylvania. Stimulus-funded projects only. There were a lot of state projects, but stimulus only, 8,600 men and women on the job site. We surveyed all the vendors who provided goods and services for those projects. 3,600 were working either rehired or new hires. It's 12,200, and that was with half of our $1 billion allocation, 12,200 workers.
Sir, where are the 21,000 jobs